Nora sat on the edge of the thin mattress in the cold half-light of dawn, her hands shaking around the chipped phone, her breath fogging in the air. The small radiator had died sometime in the night, and the room smelled of damp plaster and baby powder. Sophie stirred in the cracked crib beside her, a small sound like paper crumpling. Nora watched the tiny rise and fall of her chest, the faint curl of her fingers, and felt the weight of everything pressing down the rent. Overdue, the formula can almost empty the bills stacked like little white tombstones on the counter. She had not eaten since yesterday, her body hollow and trembling, and still she could not cry. She opened the message app and typed without thinking. Words spilling out like water. I'm sorry to ask this, but I do not know what else to do. My baby has nothing left to eat. I just need enough for 1 can of formula. Please, I will pay you back, I swear, please. And she pressed send before her mind could stop her and stared at the glowing screen, her heart hammering. Seconds passed, then a minute, and she saw the contact name and her stomach dropped. It did not say Rachel, her old friend, the one she had meant to beg. It said Damian Cole, the CEO of Cole Dynamics, the man whose name appeared in news alerts and finance shows, the man who had once shut down an entire merger with a single sentence. She had seen him only once in person from the far end of the lobby. Tall and cold as glass, she had just sent a begging message to the most powerful man she had ever been in the same building with. She fumbled for the delete button, but it was gone. Sent launched like a flare into the dark. She whispered, "No, no, no," to the empty room. Sophie whimpered in her sleep. Nora stood and paced barefoot across the cold floor, trying to breathe. Maybe he would ignore it. Maybe he got thousands of messages. Maybe he would block her and never remember her name. She fed Sophie the last thin scoop from the can, mixing it with warm tap water, praying her daughter would not taste. The weakness, she rocked her until she slept and laid her back down. Nora sat on the floor and pulled her knees to her chest, listening to the building creak around her. Hours crawled by. No reply came. She started to hope he had not seen it. Then her phone buzzed so loud it seemed to shake the table. Her heart slammed. She picked it up, her eyes wide. A message from Damian Cole. It said, "Where are you right now?" Her mouth went dry. She stared at the words. They did not look real. She typed back a trembling response. "My apartment," and sent the address because fear and hope were tangled too tight to separate. 30 minutes later, tires whispered on the wet street. Outside, a black car pulled up, sleek and silent. She saw it through the cracked curtain and froze. Then a knock on her door. Soft but certain, she opened it, with her heart in her throat. He stood there, taller than she remembered. The hallway light catching in his dark hair. His coat sharp and dry. Despite the rain, his eyes scanning the tiny space, the peeling paint, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the crib with its crooked rail. He stepped inside without asking. And she did not stop him because she could not move. He looked at Sophie, sleeping tiny fists curled. Then back at Nora. His expression unreadable. He said, "How long since you ate?" and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He said, "When did she last have full formula?" And she whispered, "Last night." He nodded once precise, then pulled out his phone, murmured something she could not catch, and within minutes another car arrived. Men in dark coats carried in bags, boxes, cans of formula diapers, wipes, a small heater, a thick blanket. He said, "These will last the month," and handed her a card. Black and smooth with a single number. "Call this if you need more." Nora stared at the mountain of supplies. Her body shaking, not from cold anymore. She said, "Why are you doing this?" His gaze held hers, steady as stone. He said, "Because a child should never go hungry while I am alive." Then he turned to leave and stopped at the door and said, "There is a position open at my company, temporary clerical work. If you want it. The pay is fair, the hours are steady. You can bring her with you. We have a daycare floor." And then he left before she could answer. The rain swallowing him, Nora stood in the doorway as the black car slid away down the street. The air tasted like electricity. She turned back to the small room. The shelves now full. The heater humming. The crib warm. She lifted Sophie and held her close. The tiny heart beating against hers, and whispered, "Maybe, maybe." Maybe she fed her until her eyes drooped, and set her gently down, then sat on the floor staring at the black card between her fingers, the embossed letters catching the light. Damian Cole. She thought of the tower of glass and steel and all the locked doors inside it. And she thought of how he had walked through her broken doorway like it had been nothing. She whispered to the dark tomorrow, "I will walk through his," and then she stood and began to wash the bottles one by one like she was scrubbing the past away while the heater hummed, and the city outside shifted toward morning. Nora woke before the alarm in the half-light of gray morning. And for a few still moments she lay listening to Sophie breathe the soft, steady rhythm that anchored her to the world. The heater ticked gently, and the smell of warm milk hung in the air. It felt unreal that the pantry had food. The crib had blankets. The baby had slept warm all night, like someone had shifted the gravity of their lives while she wasn't looking. She rose quietly, dressed in clean jeans and a plain blouse, and held Sophie close, whispering, "Today will be better than yesterday." And Marisol came at 7 sharp with her hair in a scarf and a smile like sunlight, and said, "Go be brave. The city will not bite if you walk fast." And Nora laughed breathless and caught the bus with her heart hammering. The tower rose ahead of her like a wall of light. She could see it from blocks away, reflecting the washed blue of early sky. Every step felt like walking toward a place she was not meant to touch. Yet she kept going. The lobby opened around her like an ocean, cool and bright and humming with quiet purpose. Marble floors polished until they mirrored her feet. High windows spilling gold light across steel beams. Men and women in perfect suits gliding like they had been born here. She tightened her grip on Sophie's stroller and handed the receptionist the black card. Her fingers trembling. The receptionist scanned it and her gaze flicked up. Curious, then softened. She said, "Welcome, Miss Hayes," and handed her a visitor badge and an orientation map. The daycare floor was full of warm colors and quiet laughter. Helena with the silver braid met her at the door like an old friend. She knelt to Sophie level and said, "Welcome back, little moon." And Sophie blinked and smiled wide, showing her first tiny tooth, and Nora's chest squeezed until it hurt. Helena guided them through the sign-in screens, showed her the cribs and the soft white, noise machines and the sunlit play corner with baskets of wooden animals. Nora set down the diaper bag and smoothed Sophie's blanket with slow, careful hands, and Helena touched her shoulder lightly and said, "She will be safe here while you climb your mountains." The elevator hummed as it carried her up to the 12th floor where her new job waited. The training suite smelled of paper and lemon polish. Rows of sleek desks, glowing faint blue. She met Priya, her supervisor, a slim woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice who spoke like she had no time to waste but wanted Nora to succeed. Nora learned the logins, the workflows, the inboxes where invoices landed, and the flags that meant trouble. She typed carefully. At first her fingers stiff from disuse, then faster like music coming back to her bones. She watched the numbers and names flow across the screen like a hidden language, and began to understand the rhythm of the place. At noon, she rode down to the cafeteria to check on Sophie, her heart fluttering. The whole way, the daycare was full of soft chatter and bright color. Sophie sat propped on a cushion, chewing a soft ring, her eyes wide and calm. Nora almost cried from relief. Helena smiled and said, "She is sunshine, you go eat and breathe." Nora walked to the cafeteria with her steps lighter than air. She sat near the tall windows with soup that steamed like fog and watched the city glitter below. She could almost see her old apartment in the distance, that cracked window and thin mattress and cold stillness, like a ghost watching her. She breathed deep and let it go. And when she looked up, Damien was there. He moved through the cafeteria like the air parted for him, tall and dark and quiet, his suit sharp enough to cut his hair damp from the mist outside his eyes catching light. He did not look at anyone, but they all looked at him. He came straight to her table and stopped. She froze halfway through a spoonful of soup. Her breath locked. He said softly, "Good to see you made it," and she said, "Yes, thank you for this." His gaze flicked to the stroller photo clipped to her badge and softened. Infinitesimally, he said, "She looks like someone who will rule the world one day," and Nora said, "She already rules mine." He nodded once as if that answer pleased him, and then said, "Do not try to impress anyone here. They will expect it, and it will cost you too much. Just do the work like it matters to you, and the rest will follow." And she said, "I will." And he left as swiftly as he came, the air rushing back to fill his absence in the afternoon. She shadowed Marie, a senior analyst who kept a small plant tied with a red ribbon on her desk. Marie showed her how to match invoices to purchase orders, how to trace misaligned codes, how to flag anomalies without sounding alarms. It felt like building tiny bridges inside invisible machines. Nora saw patterns even where she wasn't meant to yet. Round numbers that always came just under the review threshold, from the same 3 vendors approved in under a minute every time she wrote them. Down quietly in her notebook as the day ended, Helena stopped by her desk and said, "How does it feel to breathe different air?" And Nora smiled, small and real, and said, "Lighter." And Helena said, "Good. Keep walking forward. No one can chase you if you keep walking forward." She picked up Sophie from the daycare where she had been napping in a patch of warm sunlight and carried her out into the cooling evening. The city smelled of bread and warm stone and rain. Coming somewhere far away, she rode the bus home and laid Sophie in her crib, and stood at the window while the radiator hummed. She could see the tower lights blinking against the dark like a heartbeat, and whispered to the glass, This time we will not fall the rest of the week blurred into motion. She learned passwords, workflows, approvals, signatures. She moved through the office like a thread weaving itself into cloth. She found her feet again and her voice again. She laughed quietly with Marie over tea and showed Caleb a faster way to balance the ledger queue, and he grinned like he had found a coin in the street. She still watched the odd invoices, the perfect round numbers, the quick approvals, the ghost-like trail that ran just below the surface like a current. She wrote each one in her notebook, a secret map. Only she could read by Friday. She felt almost steady. She walked through the lobby at sunset, Sophie warm against her chest, the glass glowing gold around them, and saw Damien near the doors. Speaking into his phone, his eyes sharp and distant. He ended the call and his gaze caught hers across the marble, and something unreadable flickered there. Not warmth, not cold, something like recognition, and he inclined his head. The smallest fraction then turned and disappeared into the waiting car. The door closing with a soft sound like the start of a secret. Nora stood for a moment in the golden light holding her daughter, and thought of the path she was building, stone by stone, and how fragile it still was and how beautiful, and she whispered to Sophie, "We are climbing now and we will not stop by the next Monday." Nora had begun to move through the tower as if it almost recognized her. She carried herself taller, the fear still there but buried under something steadier. She left Sophie in Helena's arms each morning, the baby giggling and grabbing at Helena braid, and Nora would ride the elevator up with her badge clipped firm and her shoulders straight. She had learned the rhythm of the place, the morning hum of printers, the soft whirl of coffee machines. The quiet greetings passed like secret codes between analysts. She liked the smell of paper and lemon polish, and the way the floors hummed under her shoes. Like living things, she liked that she was no longer invisible. Her desk was near Marie's plant and Caleb's neat chaos of charts. She was handling live tickets, now intake verification approvals. She liked the work. It was clean, simple. A puzzle that solved if you kept breathing, but she kept seeing them, the odd invoices threaded like hairline. Cracks round numbers just under review limit the same vague memo consulting. The same 3 vendors always approved within 60 seconds. She wrote each one in her notebook. Quiet as breath by midweek, the list stretched across 2 pages and her stomach was a tight knot of unease. She caught Caleb's eye and he rolled his chair over. She showed him the page, his face tightened. He whispered, "Graham Walters has signed off on 2 of these indirectly," and Nora felt the name like cold metal in her chest. The chief financial officer, smooth and untouchable. She had seen him from far away once walking the executive hall, like a man who believed the floor existed only because he stepped on it. Caleb said to be careful. This place closes ranks around him. Marie leaned in and said quietly, "Take it to Helena. If anyone will know what to do, it is her." So Nora waited until lunch and went down to the daycare floor, where the air smelled of warm milk and soft wood, and Helena was kneeling by Sophie's mat singing something. Bold and gentle, Helena rose when she saw Nora face pale and intent, and led her into the small glass office by the window. Nora set the notebook down and opened it to the list. Helena read silently, her brow furrowing like slow thunder. She asked 3 questions: are the dates? Regular are the approvals? All under 1 minute are the amounts just under 5,000. And Nora said yes to each. Helena closed the notebook softly and said, "You will keep this quiet and you will keep collecting. Do not mention it to anyone else, not yet. Not even Marie, not even Caleb. Send the files to me every night from a public terminal on the street level floor." Nora said, "Why?" And Helena said, "Because you are seeing a shape. And if you look at it directly too soon, it might look back that night." After she laid Sophie down, Nora wrapped her coat tight and walked the 2 blocks to the 24-hour print shop. At the base of the tower, the fluorescent lights buzzed and the air smelled of toner and tired dreams she logged in on. An empty terminal and sent the copies to Helena encrypted the way she had been taught at orientation. Her hands steady even as her heart hammered. She walked home through cold air, sharp as glass, and told herself this was just protecting her job. Protecting Sophie the next days blurred with quiet tension. She kept working as if nothing had shifted. Answering tickets, logging data, smiling when Marie joked about her stubborn plant. But inside she felt like she was walking along a wire stretched high above the city on Friday morning. Helena called her down just after lunch, and there was a woman waiting in the office with kind eyes and a voice like soft steel. She said, "Internal audit. I am not here to harm you, only to see what you have seen." And they went through the list piece by piece, Nora speaking in clipped, careful words. "No color, only bone." When it was done, the woman said, "You are not imagining this. You are early to the pattern, but you are correct. We will move carefully from here. Nora left the office with her mind spinning the world too sharp around the edges. She checked on Sophie, who was babbling and clapping at a wooden fox, and the sight steadied her like an anchor. She held her daughter close and whispered, "You're why I will not look away." As they left that evening, the elevator doors opened and Damien stepped out, tall and silent, the storm of the building moving with him. He looked at Nora and at Sophie, perched on her hip, his gaze softer than she had ever seen it. He said, "She grows fast," and Nora said she has to, and he said, "So did you," and then he was gone. The air folding closed behind him like nothing had moved that night. The stairwell outside her apartment echoed with voices low and sharp words. She could not make out, and when she peered through the peephole, 2 men in suits were standing by her door, pretending to check their phones. Her chest went cold. She waited breathless until they left, then locked the door and checked the windows twice. Marisol cracked her door across the hall and raised her brows. Nora mouthed later, and Marisol nodded and tapped twice on her doorframe. Their old signal, "I am here." Nora sat at the table long after Sophie slept, her hands flat. The city buzzing low outside, she thought about the ghost invoices, the quick approvals. The way Walter's name had brushed 2 of them like a shadow. She thought about Helena, voice calm as stone, and the audit woman, eyes like soft steel, and Damien in her doorway. Weeks ago saying no. Child should be hungry while I am alive. She looked at Sophie, sleeping tiny fists curled against her cheek, and whispered, "I will not let them take this from you." Then she opened her laptop and began to plan how to catch a ghost without becoming one the next. Monday, the tower felt different to Nora, the light sharper, the air heavier, like the whole place was holding its breath. She moved through the lobby with her badge clipped, steady, and her heart locked tight. She had sent Helena another page of ghost invoices over the weekend using the street terminal late at night while Sophie slept and Marisol watched the door. She had dreamed of numbers chasing her through black water. She woke shaking, and still she came back, because this job had become more than pay. It had become proof at her desk, the morning wrapped around her like static. Marie waved from behind her plant. Caleb slid a coffee across her keyboard and whispered, "Stay calm," then buried himself in spreadsheets. Nora kept her face still, her hands moving. She logged tickets, checked receipts, filed approvals like nothing was wrong, though her mind ticked like a metronome near noon. Helena appeared silent as a shadow and said softly, "Walk with me." They rode down to the internal audit floor, where the windows faced the bay gray. Under a bruised sky, the kind-eyed auditor was waiting, and the quiet sword woman who spoke in clean, precise words. They showed Nora a map of accounts like a galaxy dots, and lines glowing blue and gold. She saw the pattern instantly, now the false vendors. Instantly. Spinning around a hollow center, the money cycling through like water wheels and draining out through a shell company tied to an offshore trust signed under the name of Graham Walters. She felt cold run through her bones. The sword woman said, "We will confront him this afternoon. You will be present as witness but silent. He will try to break your story before it stands. Stillness will protect you. Do you understand?" Nora nodded. Once her mouth dry, Helena touched her shoulder and said, "If he threatens you, you walk out holding your head high. You are not prey at 3. They gathered in a glass boardroom high above the city, rain streaking the windows. Damien stood at the head of the table in a suit, dark as storms, his eyes like cut stone. The board members filed in murmuring, and Walters lost his smile. Thin, his cufflinks winking like knives. He sat opposite Damien with the lazy grace of a man who believed he was untouchable. The sword woman began with facts, numbers, signatures, dates, the Hollow Company, offshore trust. The boardroom went still, the color draining from faces. Walters tried to laugh, tried to sneer. Called it coincidence, called it clerical error, called it imagination, and then the kind-eyed auditor slid a single paper across the table, an authorization buried in an old quarter archive with his full digital signature and timestamp. The room cracked open like thunder voices shouting, chairs scraping. Walters surged to his feet, but Damien spoke for the first time low and lethal. "You will sit and you will sign your resignation now, or you will walk out of this building in handcuffs." Walters froze, then slowly lowered himself back into the chair and signed the papers with a hand that trembled, and the sword woman gathered them like spoils and left the room silent behind her. After the board dispersed, Damien stayed staring out at the wet sky. Nora lingered by the door, unsure if she should vanish like smoke. He turned finally and said, "You could have ignored it," and she said, "I could have. But I have her." And he nodded like he understood exactly who her meant. That evening, the news broke like glass. Walters charged for fraud, embezzlement, breach of trust. His face splashed across headlines the company praised for swift action, the stock rising like a tide. Nora watched it on Marisol television while Sophie gnawed a block on the floor. Marisol hugged her until she could not breathe, and then made soup the next morning. Damien found her at her desk, his presence quiet but heavy. He said there is an opening in audit, they want you. Helena recommended you, and so did I, Nora. Stared at him, the world tilting. He said, take it or not. Either way, you have already changed this place, and walked away. She took it not for power, not for glory, but because it meant safety, a shield she could hold over Sophie forever. The work was hard and sharp but clean, and she rose through it like a flame through paper. Months passed, the city turned warm again. Sophie grew tall and fierce and laughed often. Nora's apartment, filled with plants and books and light. Sometimes Damien came by not as a storm now. Just as a man, he brought small toys for Sophie, who called him Cole, with toddler solemnity, and he stayed to eat soup and talk about stars. One spring night, they walked together on the riverfront, Sophie asleep in her stroller. The sky deep and silver, Damien stopped under the street lamp and said, the night you sent that message, you changed everything for me. Nora said I was begging, and he said you were fighting, and I saw someone worth standing beside if she would let me. She felt the world tilt again, but this time like a door opening, and said, maybe I will. And he smiled, small and real. Sophie stirred and sighed. The wind curled soft off the water, and Nora thought of the cracked crib and the empty can, and the man who had walked through her broken doorway like he was carrying the sun. She looked at him now, quiet and steady beside her, and whispered, we are not afraid anymore. And he said, no, you are home. And for the first time she believed it.